gosh, it started a long time ago. I was only 15 when I first sort of understood properly what I was eating and what meat meant. So I turned vegetarian at 15. And then when I started university at 18 then, I learned more about the dairy industry. And because I was doing a medical genetics degree, I learned a lot about the body very quickly. And I decided to study about the diet, or any sort of side project I had. I did nutrition, so I learned about the cholesterol in eggs, etc. And I just thought it made sense for me to cut off all animal products and just go plant-based. So I've been fully vegan now since I was 18, and I absolutely love it.
When you went vegetarian as opposed to vegan, was that largely because you thought that was all the cruelty that there was? I mean, that was certainly my case, but what about for you?
I think at 15 I just didn't even comprehend properly what milk and cheese and eggs were. So in my head I just thought I learnt about the meat industry very quickly, and I'd read up about it and watched some videos. And yeah, I just really didn't think that only cutting meat out didn't mean that animals didn't suffer. So I just ate cheese and milk and eggs as if it was fine. And then obviously I think when I was like 17 and a half, so just before university, I sort of started to view veganism a bit more. And initially I just kind of made excuses because I was like, well, I'm happy with, the cheese and the eggs, but I couldn't really drown out the voice like inside me that was like, it's just as bad as meat, really. So yeah, it was lack of knowledge really about veganism. And at the time when I was 15, so this was back in 2015, 2016, veganism wasn't a huge thing then. Like, you see it plastered everywhere now and the options are just immense. But back then, vegan wasn't really heard of, so I thought vegetarian was it really.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate. Whereabouts did you grow up?
So I grew up about half an hour from Swansea, so West Wales. And at the time, honestly, I would say even 2 years ago, I remember going into Llandilo, which is like a local town, and asked them for a vegan roast dinner. So I just asked them if their gravy was vegan and if they're veg, if I could just have a plate of veg. And they just looked at me like I had four heads. So where I'm from, veganism has not caught on until very recently, which is lovely to see.
Has it improved since you've been back? Are you starting to see kind of plant-based options?
Absolutely, like incredibly. Like even so, you go to a really large Tesco's in Swansea and, there's aisles and aisles of vegan food now. And now when I go to a more of a local supermarket, there is now at least like, I'd say half an aisle of vegan things. And it's still not as good, but the options are there and it's a lot easier now. So it's so good to see.
How did friends and family respond to you when you said, I'm going to go vegetarian at 15, and you started to connect these things kind of ethically? You were starting to think, well, the thing I'm eating is actually causing harm to someone.
Yeah.
Like, did they react positively? Did they understand where you were coming from? What was that journey like?
Oh my gosh, not at all, I've got to say. And my mother won't be happy I say this, but I didn't have any support at all. To the point that I had to start cooking my own food, my own dinners. So my family would eat something else and then I'd have like beans on toast like next to them, because I still at the time didn't understand about food properly. I'd never really cooked for myself. So they didn't respond very well, and my family are from like a farming background, very local. So I was really like, big black sheep of the family, like, going against everything that they know. So they didn't take it well at all. And being an athlete as well, so I started competing for Wales in gymnastics at the age of 12 and then athletics at 13. So I was a very keen athlete from a young age, and I've always known I've wanted to do well in some sort of sport. So that was like a worry for them as well, because at the time they had never really heard of someone being vegetarian and an athlete. And at the age of 15 as well, you're still undergoing puberty. So this was a big no-no for my mother. She was like, you're not getting any nutrients if you're not eating meat. But did I heck listen? No. As soon as I made that connection, that what meat was, I just couldn't bear the thought of eating it. So I worked my way through, and now I'm still here and I'm still doing the same thing.
Was there any concern for you? Like, I mean, deep down, I mean, obviously you were strong-minded ethically speaking, But from the point of view of your performance as an athlete, but based on the fact that you didn't know what you know now when you were 15 and through to 18 when you became vegan, so on. Did you have any reservations? Did you think, well, I know ethically this is the right thing to do, but am I actually going to be able to compete at the levels I've been competing at since I was 12 years old? Which is pretty incredible in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I did think about it, but my just ethical conscience was so much higher than anything else. Like, I've even told people now that, yes, my dream is to be, an Olympian or a really high sports person. But if that comes at the cost of something I'm not, that I'm against, then I'd rather not have it. So I just got to the point of, I know I'm going to follow a vegetarian diet and I'm going to do it in the best way I can. And that's why when I started university then, or even before university, doing my A-levels, I started reading around the subject of veganism and vegetarianism to try and understand the nutrition better. So of course it was a concern because I wasn't aware of the benefits. But that led me to discover that actually it's incredible. And today it still blows my mind. Like, when I read the research around anything from like bone profiling, protein absorption, it just blows my mind how amazing veganism is for someone who's performing and someone in ill health. Like, it's just incredible.
Looking back at your sort of motivation for going down the kind of medical route with your studies, and it'd be good to kind of, for folks who don't know, sort of lay out the kind of studies that you've been undertaking, because you're still in them, but you've done loads in the sort of medical and the nutritional and the sports sort of sphere. So, but do you think, looking back, there was an element of, I need to understand fully everything that I'm doing, for my sport and for my nutrition, and ethically it all kind of adds up. I need to know that there's science behind it. Was there any element of that, or was it kind of, I was always destined to do the kind of medical stuff as well, and it was kind of a nice byproduct that I got to find out whether what I was doing personally was actually good for me?
Yeah, no, actually I always sort of joked from a young age, like I'd be a doctor or a vet, or have some sort of medical career, but I didn't initially go immediately into med school from A-levels because I was unsure of the career. But yes, doing that medical research and nutrition research into veganism, I thought, what platform can I have to spread veganism and inspire people if I'm a doctor as well? Because obviously so many people talk about nutrition and claim that they know what they're talking about. But I thought, if I qualify as a doctor, and now my area of interest is sports medicine and I want to go into nutrition, I want to be as qualified as I can be, and also be a sports person who's vegan. Because how could you ever, try and speak to a vegan doctor who's also, an Olympic or professional athlete and say, oh no, you're wrong, it's bad for you. So I'm trying to create this platform where I can nearly tell somebody, there's no way that you need, to eat meat and animal products. So yeah, that has really inspired me, and it made me apply for medicine in 2020, and I was really lucky I got in first time, and that's what keeps my vision now when I enter different medical specialties. I just think, how can I learn about veganism and how can I help people with rehabilitation and prevention with diet, because it's still not seen in medicine today just how food impacts the body. So going forward, I want to be this, innovative new doctor on the sports medicine scene and really delve into nutrition. So that's like the goal going forward.
I was going to ask about that, and I've asked a lot of people who are kind of doctors, and most recently Dr. Alan Desmond, a gastroenterologist, and I was asking him about his training, and he was saying, if you wanted to learn the nutritional side, that's something you probably sought out yourself, or learnt about it after your kind of the formal studies, if you like. It wasn't necessarily something that was offered up. I know there's another doctor I've spoken to a while back, Dr. Shireen Kazam, who runs Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, and she's been a real advocate for trying to get the sort of the grassroots of learning the medical profession to include nutrition more than it already does. What's been your experience? Have you had to seek this stuff out, or has it been kind of offered up to you as, well, this is the obvious solution for so many things?
Yeah, no, it's exactly the same. And some of those names you've just mentioned, they inspired me as well, because I've been, watching their podcasts and following them since I started veganism in 2018. So I really look up to them. But yeah, in medical school, it's just not taught, it's not touched upon at all. For example, we'll be talking about diabetes, and all we'll be talking about is metformin and other drugs that you can provide for somebody to relieve their symptoms. We don't talk at all about diet, even though we know type 2 diabetes is caused literally by diet alone, because the genetic diabetes is type 1. So it just absolutely baffles me that today it's still not touched upon. So I will do a project next year. It's called a DPP project. It's like a personal project, and I will do something on nutrition and veganism going forward. So, and I've also started a new society. It's a sports and lifestyle medicine society, because I also believe in lifestyle medicine, just finding different ways to reduce someone's stress and using daily activities and meditation to improve health. So within that as well, I'll have a branch of nutrition. But, it's 2023 now, and I've had to create a society within, the medicine world to highlight nutrition and lifestyle, which is just absurd.
It's crazy to me, especially when, because I was listening to Dr. Desmond talking about this, and he was saying, and I kind of saw it from the other point of view, and I never really had. I'd always just thought, well, why isn't there nutrition taught? And then he said, well, there's being a doctor isn't like you get the papers and then that's it. You carry on studying. It's a lifelong thing that you're constantly learning and so on. So I kind of had a slightly more sympathetic view to like the fact that there wasn't nutrition, because I was like, well, they've only got so many years and they've got to go through the basics. But I think you've just shed a different light on it, which is like, well, if you're literally talking about something like diabetes, and then when you get to the bit where you talk about solutions, you talk about drugs only.
Yeah,
that seems bizarre to me.
Yeah.
So when you could you? I mean, I know there's a lot of things at play here, but could you hazard a guess as to why you think it is that way?
I don't know, but every day it nearly angers me, and I have to turn that anger into like a smile and just say, the future's going forward, it has to improve, it can't get worse than this. I really don't know, because there's even other topics such as antibiotic resistance that, and we have had lectures on antibiotic resistance, and I asked the question of, okay, so a big use of antibiotics in the UK and worldwide is on livestock animals. What can we do about that? And she just said, oh, we're not going to talk about that today. And I thought, it's so relevant. There's a big avoidance in the medicine community, not just with veganism, but other things such as antibiotic resistance and lifestyle. I really honestly can't put my finger on what it is. I wish I could tell you. I've got a few theories, but I'm just flabbergasted and haven't got a clue.
So do if I'm not speaking as somebody who's in the vaguest bit qualified, but just to chuck a couple in that I've sort of heard people talk about. I guess one is, and my citation for this, if you like, is things like the John Lewis, Keegan Kuhn documentary, They're Trying to Kill Us, over in the US, where they talk about the kind of the stranglehold, if you like, that the medical industry has, and how they're kind of the pharmaceutical industry has, and how they're kind of in lockstep with the food industry. It's all run by the FDA, and so it's kind of almost more profitable to keep people in a state of relative sickness, where they are getting treated. On the other hand, I suppose the sort of slightly more sympathetic view is it's really difficult. The stats that I've heard for doctors being able to get people to adopt serious lifestyle change are really low. It's really difficult for a GP to tell somebody you need to do this, that, and the other, and them to listen. And it's far easier for them to be medicated, because at least they won't be suffering quite as much as they would be. And so there's sort of two ends of a spectrum there. One is the sort of very dark, shadowy, conspiratorial one, and the other one being, well, actually, it's just almost like there's a given up kind of vibe of like, well, it's just too difficult to get people to think about lifestyle. Where do you kind of sit on that spectrum?
I would say I don't sit anywhere, I just jot along the line, because I don't think in this world you can ever say yes or no to a theory. And it does make sense because money moves the world. So if there are big pharma companies out there, if there are, medical companies out, in America or globally, of course they profit off ill health. Of course they profit from people, requiring their services. So it does make sense how they would make medicine more accessible. But it's just a huge cycle of even politics. And, like I said, going back to the science is so stark when it comes to preventing diseases or even reversing diseases. So why haven't, even our government picked up on that obvious scientific evidence and making, vegan meat substitutes, subsidised? Or there's so many things that the government could also do to make vegan food or plant-based food more accessible, making fruit and veg cheaper. I bet there's so many theories out there, but yeah, absolutely. I think ill health is profitable, so there's got to be an element there. And then I do agree with it is so much easier as a GP, especially, if you've been working for years and you've not had people listen to you, to just say, okay, yeah, take this. And maybe I'm really naive because I'm still in my training, but I'd like to think, I'll never lose that spark, and every single patient I see, I will really just believe in them and they can make those changes, and hopefully I can put my energy onto them. And but yeah, we'll see. Maybe if you speak to me in 30 years, I'll say, I've given up too, but I hope not.
No, I think in 30 years, I'm hopeful anyway. I'm optimistic that the vegan movement and sort of plant-based nutrition and stuff will be better understood. I want to turn a little bit to the kind of sort of still thinking kind of big ideas, I guess, but there's been a lot of in fact there is all the time, but particularly I referenced something that I saw very recently, which was and it's the second one of these I've seen recently, which is a podcast, a Diary of a CEO podcast, which is like number one in all the charts at the moment, the Stephen Bartlett podcast, and I've seen another kind of expert selling a book saying basically veganism is bad. That it's a diet that is causing massive shortfalls in kind of people's nutrition and so on and so forth. And I'd like to get your sort of view on the way that kind of the world is moving kind of from a social media point of view in the kind of medical sphere and the information sphere, because it really does sort of worry me. And actually it worries me on both sets of the spectrum, actually, because I see unqualified people in the vegan community as well, to probably giving false hope or painting veganism as an absolute cure-all for everything, and that it's going to reverse every condition that you've got and all of these kind of things. Some things that are chronic conditions and are not going to be reversed by you being vegan and so on. And on the other side, I see kind of misinformation and so on and so forth. Like it's a very difficult thing for me to ask you to pick apart, but I'd like to get your sort of viewpoint on the sort of current situation and how you see, your approach within all of that, because it's really difficult to cut through any of that noise.
Yeah, and this is the thing. The problem is simplifying science, and people oversimplify it to communicate it to an audience, because when we think about it, the average reading age in the UK is 13. So we're trying to get across really difficult scientific information about the human body, which is really complex, in a simplified manner. And when people attempt to simplify this, then the results can be different based on communication. It's difficult, and it's why I want to qualify as a doctor and be as highly qualified as I can be, because I'm hoping I can be one of those voices that, even if somebody disagrees with me, I can have that qualification and say, well, this is what I've done. And I'd like to think I can also explain myself by actually showing these studies and showing that they're not funded by certain companies such as the egg industry, the meat industry, and hopefully simplifying the stats, because everybody spouts stats, but who actually understands them? So yeah, I'm also worried as well about the misinformation and how people can claim these things, because I've seen this, like a cardiac doctor out in America, and she shows everybody every morning her breakfast, and it's like a block of butter and it's a steak. And she says how it's anti-inflammatory. And I don't like to comment, but I've commented kindly on a few of her posts and said, oh, I'd love to see some evidence on how, you know, this block of butter's good for your health or anything like that. And she'll just delete my comment because I've tried to play devil's advocate. I've thought, I don't want to be, you know, yes, I believe in reducing suffering from animals, and yes, I think that the vegan diet's brilliant. However, I have played devil's advocate, and I've thought, right, let me have a look at some evidence that actually goes against what I believe, and how I can actually maybe use some of that evidence to be realistic. But honestly, the more I delve into the science of veganism, the more I just see it is just the best diet, and how anybody can, you know, dispute any of these stats and facts is just bewildering to me.
I know, and well answered, because that was a sort of very broad and difficult question. Okay. If it was a question at all, it was more of amusing. But I'm with you. I think it's nigh on impossible, and I think it's massively admirable of you to. I love the idea of thinking critically about it and putting your own ideas up against almost a confirmation bias test. Like, am I just trying to prove my own theory right the whole time? You know, what does the opposite say? I think that's really admirable. And then also to think, you know, rather than sort of sitting here and kind of being confused, I'm going to do something about it and study and actually find out, you know, from my own perspective what is the case. Which I think is, you know, hats off to you, is incredible. Thinking about your personal. Thinking about your personal journey and like you being an athlete, turning away from the kind of the big picture stuff, although I guess it all connects. But you know, as an athlete, becoming vegan, competing for Wales, and you compete in the heptathlon, I believe. You know, what does your nutrition look like from that point of view? How have coaches kind of approached your veganism? Have you had many conversations about it? Have you had to think a little bit differently to the kind of received wisdom, the standard information in your kind of athletics journey? Yeah,
so nutrition within athletics isn't very well understood or spoken about anyway. So even if I wasn't vegan, the young athletes or even the senior athletes within Wales, we don't get any nutrition support at all. So any nutrition support hasn't been through the athletics field. I did see a nutritionist back in 2018 when I first started veganism, because I thought, if I'm going to do this because I believe in it, I want to do it correctly. And I've always taken what she said going forward, which is just simplify it. It's as easy as fruit and veg are good for you, and you need 0.8 to 1 grams of protein per kg and no more, because that's massively misunderstood as well in today's society, but I can touch upon that again if it's relevant. So yeah, nutrition support has been lacking. However, I've used my own, you know, medical research and evidence, and I've gone to my own like private nutritionist, and I've just simplified everything. So all I do is make sure I eat fruit and veg, and I've got various like protein sources, and yeah, it gets me through. And I've had so many blood tests to confirm, and I'm absolutely fine. In fact, I remember I went on a Accutane for acne like a year ago, and we had to have blood tests every couple of months for that, and the doctor just looked at the screen and he was like, oh my gosh, and he goes, how is your cholesterol so low? And I was like, because I don't eat cholesterol, because you don't need cholesterol. And actually I had like a 10-minute conversation with him, and I was explaining to him how we don't need to consume cholesterol, because cholesterol, all the cholesterol that we need is within our cells. And I was explaining to a dermatologist this, and I met him a couple of months later after my trial had ended, and he said he'd read around it, and you know, he couldn't believe it as well. So it's so funny.
Yeah, wow. I guess, I suppose it's not their, if it's not their field, perhaps they don't. But again, it's that idea of like, well, it's adjacent. Like, surely, like.
Although, you know, as much as I believe in veganism improving everything, you know, I was one of those vegans with bad skin, which I hated, because I wanted to show everyone, oh my gosh, look, I'm glowing with veganism. But my acne was really bad, and I tried all those lifestyle things, and unfortunately in the end I did have to take a medication for it. So there are limitations to diet as well, but it just should be something that's more explored initially before looking at those medication.
Do you think that's important that we talk about that there are limitations? Because I don't know, I've sort of swung back to the social stuff, but it always fascinates me. You know, like there are, we're all keen to like advocate because we all care about the animals, we care about the planet, we care about health, so on and so forth. There's all the kind of aspects that we went into veganism for that we care about, and so we're always super keen to advocate. And I find myself doing this sometimes more socially, like, with people face to face as opposed to like online, but sort of, I guess the podcast kind of does it in a way, but we kind of talk about veganism as kind of perfect. And I wonder, as you say it, do we not do enough of the realism side of things, that, thinking about your protein, because you were talking about that, as an athlete, the points, was it 0.7 to 0.8, that kind of that realm
it's 0.6
of
to
protein
0.8,
that you need per kilogram?
Yeah, and then up to 1 gram per kilogram, no more than that, yeah.
So talking about that, like as an athlete, and that may be an example, it may not be, but may be an example of one of those limitations. Is that something that's been, you've at least had to think about, maybe more so than a non-vegan athlete?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like there is realism within veganism, and obviously it's so hard to speak bad about veganism because, like I said, like the more I learn about it, the more I go into research. There is very little you can fault with veganism, but absolutely we have to touch upon that realism. That, for example, my father with multiple health conditions now, of course they could improve with the vegan diet. Of course he may have more energy, etc., but it's not going to get rid of all of his problems. So I think it's about advocating for it and being positive without, promising somebody the world, because then that creates that false sort of hope. And I think it negatively shines a light on the vegan community because we're less believable then. Whereas if we are, logical, positive, realistic community, then I think we'd be more approachable as well.
I totally agree. And I think that's such a refreshing sort of viewpoint. And you've made me think about it more, actually. It's like, as much as we're keen to spin the positive the whole time, like the kind of the realism is important, like especially around health. Because, I think even that, like, and I've talked about this with a few people and I find it kind of interesting, like, veganism's not as you know, like obviously it's not a diet, veganism is an ethical viewpoint and a lifestyle choice and the whole thing. But sometimes in order to kind of perpetuate veganism and to essentially make more people vegan, we talk about it as a diet and it kind of suits our ends to do that. But then the danger is if you only talk about it as a diet, you don't really touch upon the rest of it. And it sounds for you like, it would be really easy to pigeonhole you as like a health vegan. You're somebody who's, an athlete, training to be a doctor, all these kind of things. Like, does that sort of, are you really keen to make sure people understand that your veganism actually doesn't really come from that? It's almost like a byproduct, like a happy byproduct.
Yeah, no, I tell everyone, like, anytime I speak about veganism, I talk about, like, all realms. I actually, like, go into, like, the ethics a lot as well, and, like, almost, like, the spirituality of, like, living beings and karma. And so I actually talk about a big array of it. So I'd like to think that, being that doctor, that athlete, and then just a human being that just believes in like improving the world and everybody's health. So yeah, I do think I touch upon nearly all aspects of veganism like that, and I think that's important. But the difficulty is in the conversations that you have with various people. It's like, which bit do I pick out? Which one is going to apply to this individual today? Or which one of these points is this individual ready to take today? Because that's the thing with communicating veganism, and I found that even if I find myself in a position I want to talk about it, I wait for somebody else to ask me, because if they've asked you, they are psychologically in a position, or at least they think they're psychologically in a position to take that information, and hopefully they can absorb it. Whereas if you talk about it and they haven't asked, you're already, bouncing a bouncy ball back and fro at a wall and expecting something to come back at you. So if somebody's not ready to take that information, you could be as logical and kind and communicate it so eloquently, and someone will still say just no to you. So I definitely talk about it when someone's ready, and then I hit them at all angles, and most of the time it goes quite well, but we'll see.
Are you finding, as you kind of are setting such an amazing example, competing and so on and so forth, are you finding that as people find out that you follow a plant-based diet and that you are, vegan ethically and so on, are you finding that folks are starting to ask you about it from a point of view of like, I'm an athlete too, and I'd love to find out a little bit about your diet. I heard you were, into the plant-based nutrition side of things. Is that a conversation that's starting to crop up?
Yeah, definitely. Not as much as I'd like it to, but I have had so many athletes message me on social media and ask me for information. And I think a lot of athletes have incorporated more plant-based diets, but to find another athlete go fully vegan is very, very rare. But it's a slow movement, and just having people message me is really good. But there's still that like stigma that even if they were, I think I've had a few people come to me and say, I want to go vegetarian, but I'm a bit scared to. And I'm like, what are you scared of? What are you scared of? So there's still that little bit within like the high performing community that's just not switching up to this veganism. But I'm just really hoping if we just keep pushing, that eventually that's going to slide.
Do you think that their concern lays in, everything I've been told up till now is kind of, lean meat and so on and so forth, and high protein through meat is the way to go, and therefore they're going to lose strength or speed or whatever it is? Is it all rooted in that you're finding?
Yeah, I think the main bulk of it is, and then the second one is, even if somebody has kind of accepted that you can be a high performing athlete and vegan, they then don't know how to start or what protein sources, and they don't know how to go about it, which is why I'm hoping on my socials I can start showing more what I eat every day, and hopefully that will help bridge that gap then between lack of knowledge and actual physical application to veganism.
And I guess, I'm not speaking from any sort of nutritional knowledge point of view, but I guess that there is the thing that folks need to think about if they are transitioning, if you were to speak to somebody who's on those kind of first steps, is that your protein source is also your carb source and so on and things like that. Is that often the case? Yeah,
I think just in general, like the general population and even athletes, like the understanding of nutrition is so poor that, when I tell someone there's protein in peas, there's protein in brown rice, they can't believe it. And it's just like, isn't that not like a simple understanding that that compound or that piece of food isn't just purely protein? And then even trying to explain to someone what protein is that it's amino acids, and that of course you're trying to look for a full amino acid profile. But if you have, for example, like some tofu, brown rice, peas and broccoli on your plate, you've hit like everything that you need. So unfortunately, I think nearly everything with veganism, not even just from a nutrition standpoint, just comes from lack of education and knowledge.
Do you think apps like, was it Chromatic and MyFitnessPal and these kind of apps, do you think they're actually, when given to people without necessarily the full array of knowledge, and I'm probably talking to myself here, but when given to people who haven't got your kind of your understanding of nutrition, are kind of potentially a bit dangerous, because they make people think that their food is one thing. Their food is a protein, or their food is a carb, or their food is a fat, as opposed to that their food is actually loads of different things and it's micronutrients and all the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is when oversimplifying science comes back in, is when you're talking, it might sound rude, but uneducated people, and you simplify the science, then unfortunately misinformation then spreads. So, for example, I've got even people I go to the gym with, and I respect them highly. One of the girls posted the other day, she had like 310 grams of protein in a day. And I was like, you can't absorb that much. You can't digest that much. And it's so pro-inflammatory. I doubt she'll have like a bowel movement for like a week. That's not normal and it's not good for you. But she was told, somewhere online that obviously she's trying to build muscle and she's trying to be a bodybuilder. that she needs, 250 to 300 grams of protein, and I think she only weighs 65 kg. So it's just, absolutely absurd. She doesn't need that much. And I think, MyFitnessPal and other apps and part of the fitness industry just really highly emphasizes protein now, and wrongly so.
Do you think there's also a danger of that the general public are interacting now with people who are athletes and are bodybuilders and are actually doing stuff that needs that kind of level of nutrition, and they're thinking, I need to do that too, when the reality is, and again I'm probably talking to myself, the reality is they're going to an office 5 days of the week and playing five-a-side football 3 times a week or something at most, or going for a jog for 5k once or twice a week, and that they don't need any of that stuff to do what they're doing.
Yeah, and again, that comes from, for example, the supplement industry now. You'll have nearly every household will have, somebody who goes for a jog 3 times a week, and they've got creatine monohydrate, and they don't understand what creatine is, and they don't know where it's derived from, and it's crazy, isn't it?
Somebody watched I've been guilty of this in the past. You watch a reel, and you probably the lizard part of your brain says, I want to look like that. That guy's taking creatine, so I probably need to do that too, on my way to sit down at a desk for 8 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where trying to understand personalities come in. For me, I've always wanted to know what I'm doing before I do it. So before I've ever taken creatine or any supplement, I've always wanted to know, from a biomolecule standpoint, so really scientific standpoint, what is this in my body? What's this doing on a molecular scale? And then how will this improve my performance, and how will I take it right? But again, going back to that, most people won't try and understand that, and they will just, take 3 or 4 scoops of creatine, which then is impacting their kidneys. And so it's everything just comes down to misinformation and miseducation, unfortunately.
I love that idea. I think we should all probably, if we take nothing away from this podcast, think about exactly what it is that we're doing. Again, probably speaking to myself, but think about it before we jump in and believe the first thing that we see online, even if that person's doing really well with that. We don't know what they're doing, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Thinking about the heptathlon for uneducated folk like myself, who wouldn't know the difference between a heptathlon and a decathlon and all the rest of it. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you compete in.
Yeah, so the the heptathlon is 7 track and field events over 2 days, and females do the heptathlon, and then males do the decathlon, which is 10 events. Don't ask me why we do a different amount of events. That goes back to history and women in sport, and that's a conversation for another day, I'm sure. But so it's 7 track and field events over 2 days, and the faster that you run, the further you throw, and the further you jump, and the higher you jump gets you more points. And it's all on this calculated point system online. So the first day is 4 events. So we do the hurdles, high jump, shot put, and the 200 meters. So obviously how you perform in them will collate to a score at the end of the day, and you'll be ranked against everyone else. And then on the second day, which is my favourite day, which is javelin, long jump, and the 800 meters then. So once you're done, again, all your points are collated, and the person who's obviously run faster and jumped higher, they'll win. So it's pretty fun.
It sounds pretty epic in terms of I'm just thinking of how you go about training for so many different events, so many disciplines. What's that like? Is it do you have to do a lot of things that kind of will cover the kind of the biomechanics of three or four events? Is that kind of how you try and manage your time with it?
To be honest, after doing the heptathlon, I've done multi-events since the age of 13, but I started the heptathlon during 2019, so just before COVID, so I haven't been doing it for too long. I'm still trying to understand what's the best way to train. It's difficult because you've got 7 technical events. So again, going back, similar to my vegan diet, we just try and simplify it. So we need to be running quickly, and we need to also run the 800 meters. So we do 3 running sessions a week. Each one's different. So we'll have at least 2 sprint sessions. So like accels work, and then we'll have like a longer running session then, like lactic acid session, to cover that 800 meter base. So you've got that speed in your legs as well as like that longer, more tedious running then. And then we make sure that we do every event technically a week. So even like for the javelin, we might not throw a javelin as such and do a full run up javelin, but I'll have at least a javelin in my hand once a week, and I'll do something with that, or I'll have a javelin ball. So it's going through those motions. So the training for the heptathlon is trying to get that speed and that long distance running, as well as power. So we do a lot of like power stuff in the gym, and then trying to cover the events technically then, like every week. But it's a heck of a gobful, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. How did you get to compete for Wales? Like, what's that process like?
So in the younger age groups, you go through school. So I was lucky, I was just naturally quick. So I just got picked to represent my school, then represent my county, and then you go to like a schools international and you compete against England and Scotland and Ireland. So a lot of my initial international career was from a very young age, just going through the school system, which is fab. Like, I think it's so good that schools allow that opportunity. And then actually in the senior years of my career, it's actually been a lot more difficult. International opportunities have massively dropped because you haven't got that school system. So you have to almost look for it yourself. But we're quite lucky that every year there are a couple of internationals, such as like, you've got like a combined event cup. You'll have another like home match against like Scotland and Ireland. And yeah, so Wales will need like 2 or 3 or 4 athletes. It depends. It changes based on the competition. And yeah, if you're ranked like top 4 in Wales, then you'll get picked then to represent your country, which is fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So the goal, like you said, is to be an Olympian and compete for Great Britain, I take it?
Yeah, I'd love to. Like, my initial goal, realistically, is the Commonwealth Games. So I was really lucky I got invited to the last Commonwealth Games, but I got injured, so I've now got to wait till 2026. And that's what I'm working for now, because you've got to re-qualify. And the qualification standard has gone up again, and it's past the Welsh record. So currently, that's what I'm aiming for. And then if 2026 goes well, then I obviously love the opportunity to represent Great Britain. But it is made more difficult lately because the politics in our sport, there's lack of opportunities. And that's kind of why I'm looking at other sports, because I've had other sports such as like Welsh rugby and GB bobsleigh kind of asked me to go for trials. So I am sort of expanding my horizons, but I also want to be a good heptathlete. So I'm trying to balance and manage those like expectations.
Well, as we talked about before, you've always got a place at the Green Gazelles.
Yeah, I'm totally going to try it out.
Off that rugby career. Lauren, it's been awesome chatting with you. It's been a real education, and I appreciate your time. You're super, super busy with all those events and all that studying. I just can't imagine what your timetable looks like. So I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. I've absolutely loved it as well. And thank you so much for having me.